Hi everyone, welcome to PA Talks. In this episode, we are thrilled to host a visionary from the world of architecture. He's Iman Ansari. He is the co-founder of architectural practice called An.onymous and also associate professor of architecture, Knowlton School at the State University of Ohio. We will dive into some of Iman's recent projects and also talk about current emerging technologies in architecture. Before we dive into the episode, let's highlight Pacademy, an architectural educational platform dedicated to parametric design and computational tools in architecture. In collaboration with top architects and designers, we have covered a vast array of topics in this domain. Join our live workshops and explore the cutting-edge intersection of design, technology, and architecture. Now let's get into the discussion with Iman Ansari. Okay, thank you so much, Iman, for joining our office for this interview. I've been looking forward to have this conversation with you. At PA Talks, we have been bringing so many pioneering architects and forward thinkers in our platform, and they have been sharing their ideas, they have been sharing their experiences, how they are doing it, why they are doing it, and it's been a great source of information for the aspiring architects who want to learn your people's story, architects' stories. So yeah, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Hamid. I'm excited to be here and I look forward to this.
Thank you so much. For those people who have not yet heard about Iman Ansari, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Iman Ansari. I'm an architect, currently based mostly in the US, obviously both in California and Ohio. We also have done projects and are working in New York and Texas as well. I'm also an educator. I teach and split my time between academia and practice.
Great, awesome. So what are you focused on these days? Which one is taking much of your time, practice or academia?
Well, it's a difficult question. It's I would say splitting time between the two is a challenge. Usually during the school year, we're more occupied and busy with teaching and research. And when the school slows down in the summer and during the winter breaks, we shift gear to practice. So I would say right now, given we're in the middle of the semester, I would say mostly teaching, research, writing, and less practice. We pick that up usually around April, and and some of the projects, most of the work we do, we invest in the summer, and then we continue during the year in terms of overseeing the work. If it's in construction or if it's developing, we kind of slow down but continue it during the year.
Mm-hmm. What do you do exactly at An.onymous? Like, what are you generally focused on, and what is your principles that you try to portray out the An.onymous is doing this kind of work? What is exactly that you set up as the principles of your practice?
So I became interested in architecture because as a kid, as a young person, I was interested in architecture as a field that combines art and science, but something that creates interactions, meaningful, sometimes mysterious interactions between bodies and environments. So when we started An.onymous, I would say about 10, 11 years ago, we were interested in those issues, but we were also really interested in the idea of technology in architecture. So the type of work we do, I would say, is we do various scales. We do work from furniture design to interiors to architecture, buildings, and even urban design projects. But our main focus is the relationship between bodies, buildings, and how technology and architecture can mediate and manage and organize that relationship. So that's something that we explore not just through our use of tools through design, through representation, but also how those tools and technologies inform the interactions, movements, and the relationships that occur in the space architecturally. So that part of it is building technology in general. Other aspects of it is kind of appropriating certain technologies that were not traditionally part of architects' tool set. They were not traditionally part of buildings, but beginning to appropriate them to architecture. Like the office chairs we're both sitting on is a good example of that. So yeah.
Yeah, talking about the chairs, you recently did a good project that I really like about it. It's the gravity chair.
Zero gravity.
Zero gravity, yes, I'm sorry. Zero gravity, it's a circle chair that it can move, it can go around, it has different stages, steps that you can sit on or use your laptop with, or have some coffee on it. So would you like to talk about it?
Yeah, it's actually one of the, I would say, earlier projects we did. So we started our office in New York. My partner and I were both at the time in New York. And at that time, we were doing really large scale. I think we did 2 or 3 projects, urban design proposals. And then within about 2 years, we moved to Los Angeles, to California. And moving to California kind of not only transformed us as individuals but also really changed our practice as well. We were really inspired by the culture in LA. We were inspired by the work of LA architects, especially the LA school. People like Tom Main, Craig Hodgetts, Frank Gehry, and also the newer generations, Neil Denari, Greg Lynn, and many others who we also got a chance to work with, who were teaching with them at UCLA. And the type of projects we started doing also changed. So the project you're mentioning, we began a collaboration with UCLA City Lab and worked on kind of one project that had 2 components for NASA JPL. So JPL, as you may know, is the kind of engineering component of NASA. They designed the rovers and the machines that, like the Martian rovers that were sent to Mars. And we were asked to offer proposals for the redesign of JPL's offices in Pasadena, California. So one component of it was the interior, which we looked at the office chair and the problem with the office chairs. The office chair is actually interesting because the very first office chair was Charles Darwin's, and he manually attached the wheels to his normal chair so he could move around his office while he was working with different specimens and he was looking at his books and all that. So, and since then, office chairs really haven't changed much. There's still chairs on wheels, right? So, and because they're designed the way they are, then the floor has to be flat. It has to be certain material. You can't have thick carpets because you can't move your chair. And the desk has to be certain height. So we realized that a lot of the problems, the kind of mundane or generic appearance of a lot of offices is not it's not the fault of architecture. It's the fault of the office chair. So we can't really rethink it without redesigning the office chair. So what we did is we were inspired by JPL's rovers. So we decided to design an office rover, which we called, in the spirit of spirit opportunity, we called this productivity. And with that, because it had rover wheels, you could have the office could have any terrain, and it kind of liberated us to completely transform the interior. The second component of that was they asked for a kind of a workspace for basically outdoor workspace. So people could in their campus, they could work outside, they could have a focus space, they could collaborate, and this is where zero gravity came in. So we were interested in the use of tubular steel furniture, especially the modernist architects. Many of them use tubular steel, Marcel Breuer, Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, others. But we were also interested in the use of tubular steel in the medical industry. Like the first collapsible wheelchair was made of tubular steel because they could design a strong frame, but they could also fold it. And for us, that was interesting. So the chair was really inspired by those modernist chairs, including the first collapsible wheelchair by Everest and Jennings. And we basically decided to place all of them around the circle, around the loop. And
That's where circle comes from.
The what?
That's where the circle idea come from?
Yeah, because first we wanted them to be able to move it anywhere. So we were like, how do you move something? So we decided it has to be a big wheel. And then we decided that if we place all of these profiles of the chairs around the wheel, then you could choose any of the chairs you want by just turning the wheel. In a way, you get 4 chairs in one.
4 different type of chairs in one chair.
Yeah. So that was the start. But then when we placed them, then we realized there are all these spaces between the chairs that were not meant to be used to sit or lean, but they create these new postures. So in some ways, you have unlimited number of postures and seating positions. You could sit on one of those sort of prescripted chairs, Mies, Le Corbusier, Marcel Breuer, the wheelchair, but you could also kind of invent your own and find your own comfort zone within that frame. So that's where basically where the idea came from and how it was developed.
It looks interesting, like very innovative, and it seems like it fits inside a tech company's office or a campus or somewhere.
But the key thing for us, because this is why zero gravity, for me personally, is probably one of the most important projects we did, because we always wanted to kind of present architecture as something that is deeply tied to the human body, that it cannot exist and it cannot be conceived without establishing a relationship with the body. And zero gravity was important because, and the reason it's called zero gravity is because the chair has no orientation or position. If you leave it outside, it can keep rolling and moving, and it only finds balance with a human body inside. So it's only complete with a human body inside. And that way, for us, it tied the idea of architecture as a large piece of furniture or a microenvironment to the human body, and the idea of creating this balance and this idea of becoming whole together in one place. So that's kind of why for us it was really important too.
Are there any other projects like this coming?
Well, we actually recently did a project also in collaboration with UCLA Study Lab for UCLA. It's called Bean, and it was dealing with the problem of housing insecurity. So in a lot of big cities in the US, especially in a place like Los Angeles, many students live very far from campus, and because of traffic and distance, they cannot go home and come back. So what happens is a lot of them end up sleeping in their cars on camp or stay on campus just because they can't go back home and get back on time. So there's this housing issue and places around campus are too expensive. There's not enough housing. So UCLA came up with the idea of what they called Brewing Hub, which is pretty amazing, where they decided to set up a space with a series of pods um, that students can rest, study, sometimes wait out traffic before going home, or in the middle of the day if somebody needs there's no place for anyone to go and take a nap or go and focus and study, relax, or have some privacy, maybe. Um, so we work with City Lab to develop that, and the key component of that is the bean, which is a individual pod. I would say even smaller than zero gravity, which is also shaped like a bean. And you have this individual pods that are easily fabricated, relatively.
But it's not woolly in these chairs.
It has wheels, but it's not meant to be as mobile as zero gravity. You could still move it around in the room, but you have also inside, you have a place to plug in, charge your phone. You have a moving screen. If you need privacy, you can sit and work. You can turn the little pillow or thing and literally sleep. So it's kind of this little personal space for students to just rest, study, relax, or just sometimes just wait and hang out.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. You also worked with, you proposed a project for Hyperloop.
Yeah, Hyperloop was very exciting but also challenging, and it happened exactly right around the time we moved to LA. Like within the first 2 years, we were working with NASA JPL, and we started working with Hyperloop as their design partner. Hyperloop, we were particularly working. There are two companies that have been developing Hyperloop. So we were working with one of them, Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, and we were really excited about it because exactly there's no precedent for it. Like if you get hired to design a train station or an airport, you have precedents. You have a set of standards already established. As an architect, you know how to go about it. You know
Everything is written for it.
Yeah, there are codes, standards, protocols already defined, and because of that, those established building types.
Yeah.
Right. So building types have already all those kind of the standardized components established within them. With Hyperloop, there was no precedent, so we had to kind of write the manual, write the standards from scratch, and we had to figure out what's the role of architecture within this new transportation system. So we worked with them. We started initially working with them, designing their showroom in LA. We then helped them design the interior of the capsules. We worked with them to design the pylons, the kind of these forms of urban infrastructure that carry the tubes within cities and rural areas. But the key component was the design of the station or the terminal. And that took us a lot of kind of time and discussions and working closely with the team at Hyperloop and the engineers to figure out like what does this hub, we call it mobility hub, looks like. And just to give you an example of it, with Hyperloop, because of the speed, we had to account for a movement of 30,000 people within a day in the station, if it is to say work in a city like Los Angeles. and to manage the movement and flow of not just the capsules coming into the station, unloading, reloading, and leaving, but also how to move the people, the huge crowds, and move them as efficiently as possible through the space. But I would say, as architects, what beyond kind of issues of efficiency and engineering and mechanical components, what we really were interested in was to turn this hub into a destination, really in a true sense of the word. So it's not just a place you go to travel, but to kind of turn it into a really vibrant, active public space. It sort of put interesting programs there that people could benefit from, so that they don't have to, sometimes they don't really need to travel. They could just come there for a meeting, come there to do shopping, come there to play, come there to watch a movie, and integrating it with transportation within the city.
Yeah, right. Uh, like as technology moves forward, new kind of spaces or architecture is needed, of course, and the Hyperloop station. As after that time, even we saw other companies also propose ideas about stations in Europe, in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and this is gonna be one of the challenges of how to emerge new standards for these kind of spaces inside our cities, and what would be the relations, what would be the interactions of the people. It's not a random metro station. It's just a hub. It's like a terminal which connected with higher speed machines, let's say. Yeah, definitely it requires so many hours of technology and so many hours of figuring out the things. And I was amazed by your project actually, and yeah, quite creative enough. And you're also working on the North Star Medical Campus. Do you want to talk about it as well?
Yeah, so this is a project we actually started right around the time we last met in 20, actually started 2018, but it really picked up 2019, and it's still ongoing. This is a medical campus, as we like to call it, in North Richland Hills in Texas, which is a suburb of Fort Worth, so Dallas and Fort Worth area. So there are three buildings, and the first building was just completed a few months ago, and we're now we're starting construction on the second and the third building. So that's a project where I would say it's actually our first ground up built project. And so we're really excited about it. And, but you know, it was like most early projects, there were a lot of limitation. Our budget, I would say, was not very generous. So we had to work with, we had to try to do a lot with very little time, very little resources, consultants.
As all projects, actually.
As all projects. I mean, not all projects. Some architects get big budget projects, so they can do a lot. So I would say so what we try to do, I mean, in every project, we really try to, rather than trying to do everything, we pick on one thing and try to do it or rethink it well, and hopefully reinvent that thing. And so in this project, we were really interested in the idea of movement, of how an office works, really, not like how it looks like or where the rooms are, but really how do people patients, doctors, nurses, staff move in the office, because the movement and flow of doctors, patients, and staff in a medical office is actually really complex, and they usually work like clockwork. So patients come in, they check in, they wait, then a nurse comes, picks them up, takes them to a room. The nurse calls the doctor goes, visits the room, then the doctor goes back, the nurse checks, talks to the patients, then the patient goes, they check out, they pay.
Yeah, there's a
So,
circulation.
and then there is a pattern, and it keeps repeating. So you can't, if you look at a lot of medical spaces, they really have over the years become the layout and the way they're designed, they're really designed based on that model of that efficient circulation pattern. And when we were first approached about the project, the client told us, I have 3 priorities. Number 1, circulation efficiency. Number 2, circulation efficiency. Number 3, circulation efficiency. So we realized that this is really important. And as an example, he was telling us, if my gloves are moved 2 inches, I would spend half a second more to grab them. If you add that half a second to the 50 patients I see every day, that's this many minutes that I lose, and I see less patients. I make less money. I see the patients are less happy, and so that's the kind of importance of this efficiency. So
you mentioned you run a couple of simulations, or many of them. Can you also elaborate a little bit more on that?
So how do you design for that? The tools we have, CAD, Rhino, Revit, none of them can actually test the stuff. So in the past, like in the 19th century or early 20th century, architects would build mock-ups or do experiments on physical space and test it. But at the scale of a building, unless you build a mock-up 1-to-1 scale and have doctors, patients, and nurses kind of move in the space and observe them, there's no way to test it, at least till now. So then we learned about these simulation tools. So by now there's actually more, but at the time we started, we were using 2 simulation software, Pedestrian Dynamic and AnyLogic. And what these tools do is they were designed originally to simulate the movement of crowds, especially in large buildings or spaces like airports, train stations, stadia.
So it simulates the human interaction with the environment, or
it simulates, it actually originally,
or it simulates objects as well. What is it?
It simulates how humans, originally it was developed as a way to simulate the movement of the flock of birds, or a school of fish. But what they do is you set up the space in a 3D model, and then you say, I have 200 people coming in, or let's say in a stadium. You have a model of the stadium with everyone seated in their seat. The game finishes, and then you say, now everybody's leaving. So it simulates how people get up, and how they move through the exits, where they go, how long it takes, how much traffic there's going to be. If it's overcrowded, people stop, and then it piles up, right? So typically, at least in the way it's been used, it's the behavior of those human agents in the computer model is just they all do the same thing. Like a crowd in a stadium that they all have to exit. So they all move, or in a train station, you just come into the thing or you leave. We wanted to use the software, but we had very specific behavior, because the way a doctor moves in a medical office or a patient or a nurse is not the same. So we had to go and reprogram the behavior of and establish different agents. So, and set up the pattern of their movement and the fact that they have to meet and move. And so that's a much more complex layer of interaction simulation. So it took us at the beginning when we started, the softwares were not very developed. They were not very user friendly. So it was a painful process
So you modified.
to modify and recode it. And
I mean, was it a kind of open source thing or?
well, it kind of, no, the software does allow you to define behavior, but I don't think when they designed it, they expected someone to design the behavior of a doctor or a nurse. So the behaviors are usually very simple behaviors. Like go from this room to that room, but not like go from this room to that room, pick up one person, walk with them, go back to this room, right? So yeah, we had to kind of figure that out and resolve it. But once we did, then we had a working model. Like we kind of had that sort of scripted version, digital version of it. And what we decided to do, we were like, we want, rather than using the tool rather than designing a space and then using the tool to just test it, to just validate our theories, we want to use it as a design tool. So in order to do that, we just laid out and placed the main spaces in a computer model, and then we ran the simulation. And then it gives you an analysis that says these are the bottlenecks, this is traffic, these are the spaces mostly used, these are the spaces not used. So you begin to see how it works. Then we looked at that, we're like, okay, there's too much traffic here, this is too far, and then we moved the stuff around and then we ran it again. So we kept doing it, and every time we get the results, we would go and modify and move the spaces in the plan. So essentially, the floor plan developed through this iterative simulation process, which not only allowed us to kind of test those assumptions, but also to use the tool as no longer as just an experimentation tool, but really as a design tool, and so that we could actually know by some degree of scientific certainty that how the space would be used and whether it works or not. So
yeah, actually, this is a good point that you mentioned, and I think this is the direction that computational design and parametric design is headed, to use the power of computation to simulate the human behavior inside a space rather than designing the walls or like the shape of the geometry, but designing the interaction, designing the amount of crowd, designing the efficiency in terms of time, efficiency in terms of using the maximum amount of space. I think, yeah, computational design is moving towards that. The first years that we had it was just aesthetical aspects of the computation and parametric design, but nowadays it's much more deeper, it's much more practical, it's much more efficiency, and heading into a right direction, I think.
yeah,
It's also involving the geometrical and aesthetical stuff. What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think obviously, I mean, as architects, we love how things work, but we also love how they look.
Yeah.
So you can't separate the two. Just like in nature, or form and function are always tied. I think the problem is when we focus too much on one thing and forget the other. Whether it's focus on form and disregarding how that form, what type of function and use that form implies, or on the other hand, if we focus too much on function and efficiency, and disregard the formal, but also I would say the cultural and sort of the meaningful, symbolic qualities of architecture as well, material qualities as well. I think simulation. I am really excited about computation and all of this, but more in a way how they allow us to do things um, that we couldn't do in the past. I think in the past, as an example, um, uh, like when I'm now working on a book on the history and design and construction of the Johns Hopkins Hospital. And there was a time, because they didn't have tools to test it, they would build, like the Hopkins Hospital was built as an architectural laboratory. So each building was designed differently, or the ones that were same with a different heating and ventilation. So they could test how people would behave and how they would feel in each building, so they could arrive at the best solution. And that's the only example that you actually had to build the thing. And now we don't have to do that. We can do it with no cost of construction, no cost to any living human being. We could use simulation to do all of that and to actually see the impacts of what we design in a digital environment, and design through that before it's building physical in the physical realm. And a lot of companies are developing their own simulation tools already, and appropriating the technology to their specific use. A lot of architecture firms now are using simulation tools, and they're offering services. But I think it's not yet, other than a few people using it in their teaching, in their design studios and schools, it's not typically how we're taught to design. We're taught to draw floor plans and diagrams and draw arrows and show.
I think in the school we're so manual still in architecture education. In schools. We're still so manual, and this is affecting somehow the students, the future of them, their absorption to the practice, to completely adapt with the new tools and technologies. It takes a lot of time, but yeah. What are your points on the new tools that are emerging? Like, I don't know if you have used them or not. Like Midjourney, DALL-E, ChatGPT. Probably you have tested, of course.
Yeah, of course. I'm very interested in where that's going. To respond to your comment about education, I think we're living, which is exciting, we're living in a time where tools and technologies and techniques that emerge from them, they're developing so fast that it's hard to keep up, whether both in academia, the academy, but also in practice as well. Because by the time you establish an educational model around it, the tool is outdated and we have to move on. So yeah, there is a little bit of that. The academy is to some degree lagging. Not always, by the way, but let's say generally speaking. But it's not just just teaching, let's say, students, teaching them tools and teaching them how to use the tools, or how to come up with inventive ways to use the tools. It's also the way we deliver projects. If you think about, I tell my students always, like, if you think about the way you walk around every architecture school, students still do drawings, usually plans and sections and maybe some views. They print it on paper, pin it up on the wall, and then they have a physical model, right? And that's how the projects are presented, right? And they stand and talk. If you compare that to, I'm not even gonna go to say the Beaux-Arts, but if you compare it, I don't think that has changed essentially as a model since the Renaissance, right? like it's the same thing. It's relying on forms of two-dimensional inscriptions on paper, drawings and text, and a physical model, and both are static. Both don't are not able to show movement. They're not able to show time. They're not able to show, to some extent, even scale in a way that we could. So I think it's not just the tools and teaching them, but also how projects are presented that need to be reevaluated and rethought. Now, about AI and Midjourney and Dolly, when I haven't personally used Dolly, but when Midjourney became available and I began using it, one of the first things I did, I put in, because as you well know, it translates text into image, right? So it's a text to image. I put in a simple white cube because I know the tool can do amazing things, but I wanted to know how intelligent the artificial intelligence is. And it did so many iterations and they all looked beautiful, but none of them were either simple because they all had aggregate, they looked complex without needing to be complex. So they weren't really simple because a lot of them had multiple cubes within one cube, even though I wrote cube. They weren't simple. They weren't always white. They were some milky white, yellow, little brownish, almost like painted on canvas, because it assumed like I want a painting or a drawing, right? And if you look, none of them were cubes because the heights and the widths of the sides were always different. So at the end, I got a series of images that were neither simple nor white nor a cube. Right. Now, since then, Midjourney has corrected those.
So it's been developed a lot. Like the first models, it was very basic. Like now, I typed what you said, simple white cube.
Yeah.
This is what it pops up.
Okay.
That's good. Really simple white cube.
Yeah. So now I think it's. So they are improving it, right? But
the version 4 is very much ahead of like the first models that they released a couple of months ago. Like it's very advanced.
Yeah, and I think they're doing. I think they're doing a fantastic job. But generally, what I think is, and let's not forget, this is going to revolutionize the way we represent projects. Exactly. I think to ignore that, it's just you can't ignore that. I mean, in the past, just a few years ago, you would have to hire a visualization company and pay, which we've done in the past, pay a couple of $1,000s to get an image, and now you could do it within seconds, right? Exactly. So is it going to impact architecture? Is it going to replace architects? I would say no, but it is going to transform the industry, and it is going to transform a lot of the visualization parts, a lot of the labor and cost, time that used to go into visualizing things, especially if you want to talk to clients, communicate your ideas, all that. But I think it's important to differentiate between, because it's called artificial intelligence, it's important to differentiate between intelligence and creativity. And this is something that not in architecture, in other fields, they're dealing with it too. People, are like now with Chat GPT, they're testing how the machine can write like Shakespeare and how well it can write like certain like big figures in art, in literature, and it can do a good job. But what the machine can do, it can only use its available database, which for now it's just the stuff online. Yes. And to predict.
Even not the updated data. It was probably before 2022. It's written there that The
Yeah.
database is old. Like you can't find today's news on ChatGPT or.
Oh, I didn't even know that. Yeah, but still, the stuff online is limited. But the key is it uses a database, but it can only recombine and represent those. And it cannot come up with its own. Like it can do a great job imitating Shakespeare, but it cannot become a new Shakespeare and come up with a new. I mean, maybe in the future it can, but the way it works as a model that uses a database and tries to predict patterns and predict what you want, inevitably it cannot generate new things. It cannot create new things. It can only recombine and represent it. If you look at the images, beautiful images that Midjourney DALL-E produces, it's always fragments and ideas of existing artists, architects, visualizations, right? So there's a whole issue about
The authorship.
authorship there as well,
Yeah.
right? It only uses their ideas to generate new ones. Now we can have a conversation about what we define as creativity, because you could say, to be creative, we are always influenced by
Yeah.
stuff we see, and we always use that and create new things. Maybe to some extent that's true. There's always influence, but I also think that
If you would give like percentage, what do you think? I believe like 95 or maybe not more than 90% of our uh, creativity is driven by the inspirations that we had from before. Maybe 5 or 10% we add creativity, and then it becomes something new.
maybe
We always inspire from people who did things before us.
yeah, there's no question. There's no question about that. And I think, we could argue whether, if it comes to, say, visual production, how limited that is. We are limited with a limited number of materials, colors, forms. So you can't just come up with, ultimately, whatever you come up with in some form or another is coming from existing material palettes, colors, forms in the app world, right? But I think the key question is then, what is architecture? If architecture is about producing images, and by the way, these are all 2D, so the machine, at least for now, cannot generate 3D. Will it do it? Yeah, I'm pretty sure within a few months it will start generating 3D as well. But the challenge with that is we have a ton of images online, but if you look at the database for architects, like if this is to be implemented in architecture and we want the machine not to design a building, let's say we're designing a medical office, right? And instead of spending time doing research and looking at floor plans and all that, we want the machine to survey them and come up with a generic working model. So at least we have a place to start and we know how it works. I think it can do it, right? But in order to do that, you need a database of 3D models of buildings. That database, I would say, doesn't exist. Like, if you look at all,
Not now.
well, not now, yeah. But to do that, we need to then first build a database because architecture is more than just the visual appearance of the buildings or interiors. And if we want the machine to tell us a little bit about how buildings are put together, how spaces relate to each other, what's the size of the things, what's the relationship between them, where do you get in, where do you get out, right? Then that information has to be in 3D. If you go on Google or SketchUp Warehouse, the only 3D models you can find is probably Frankfurt Wright's Falling Water and Le Corbusier's Villa Savoye, right? But art, and so there's two parts. One is the 3D finds, which a lot of offices have, but that they haven't yet shared it. So we have to go to architects' offices and ask for the 3D models of buildings, right?
Yeah, that's I think the issue. I think architecture companies, because the database is not available for everyone, uh, we are not in that stage to generate 3D models, or because as you mentioned, there are so many relationships, there are so many considerations in designing process that without having database we can't guess about them, and we can't train the algorithm to have predictions or generating some stuff about it, because each architecture office company until now, the projects that they have built, they have done, it was all confidential. And there it's not out there, so we can have a broader database of, well, let's say 10,000 architecture offices around the world who have worked on for example hospitals, or medical center, or a cinema, or a cultural center. We don't have that database, so we lack it. Recently, I have been hearing some news about some architecture companies joining forces to create some kind of a mutual database as a shared technology between themselves. No, don't know about the details of it, and don't know about all the companies. Just heard a couple of names. But if such a things happen, it's really a huge help.
Yeah.
A huge help for professional. Like it's a step forward. Like we won't be doing architecture if we have such a thing as we did before.
I think, I agree. I think we need that database before otherwise all we would keep doing is to play with images and 2D images, which is nice, but it's not gonna get us architecture. It's gonna get us images. But and this is a challenge. It's not just with AI. I mean, that's why Briglin a few years ago did a show at the CCA called The Archaeology of the Digital. I mean, since architects in the late 80s and throughout 90s shifted to digital tools and technologies, I mean, we don't have the archive of all in the past, you had series of tree sketches and paper drawings and all that. So it was easy to have an archive of, say, Cedric Price's work, and have it all in one place. Now, if you want to archive, which is what he was doing, and Frank Gehry's work, or some of the architects, or Zaha's office, right? The drawings alone are not enough, because the drawings are just the stuff that were handed to the contractors, the drawing set. Like, where are the 3D models and all the digital files that went along with it? And not only that, is that the computers and the softwares are changing so fast. In order to archive it, you also need those machines and the software to house that data, right? But I would say, to go back to the conversation about AI, I think if you have the 3D model and you have all the information of a digital 3D model, that would be a huge help. But there's another factor to that too. If you work in any office, there's some knowledge and expertise that is not yet part of any manual, any textbook. It doesn't show up in the drawings. And like, if you're working in an office, say a junior architect is working in an office and they're designing say skyscraper, right? The moment they start drawing curtain wall, they're gonna be taught like, hey, there's a certain set of rules. You can't do a curtain wall like this. The mullions have to be spaced this far. So that person will have to, at some point, sit with a senior architect, and the senior architect would redline the drawings and say the reason we placed them this far is, for instance, the class manufacturer, or the fact that the panels will come in this size because it doesn't fit the truck, or they cannot fit it in an elevator, right? So that knowledge and expertise is not even in The office's, it's not even in the office's hard drive, like the 3D models. It's in the architect's head, right? And if we want AI to be fully intelligent and to design us at least thoughtful working buildings, we also need to find a way to transfer that knowledge, that expertise to the machine as well. And there are softwares that I think are beginning to do that. I think the whole BIM industry and Revit, they're beginning to integrate some of that knowledge, but there's another layer to that comes from experience, and I think it's only in their heads, and we have to find ways to kind of extract it.
Exactly. I remember I was reading an article in 2013. An article was published about the jobs that will be replaced by 2030 in US, so 7 years from now, which might not be true completely, but they have been analyzed all the professions, almost 700 professions, and they gave a computerization factor for each profession. This computerization factor, according to 100% to 0%, if it is high enough, it's going to be replaced by AI or a computer model or anything automation stuff. Or if not, if it is close to 0 or 1, it's a very tough job. It requires very creativity. And the top of the list was cashiers, the servants, the very, let's say, a little bit of the easy jobs that require less talent to do. In the middle was around architecture and engineering drafting was around 47%, but architectural design was around 5%. The toughest job was archaeology. That required so many information and talent and creativity to guess, to have these predictions of, okay, this is the history, connect so many of information together to have this kind of prediction. Okay, there's something in here. And I was just excited when I read about the archaeologists and architects 5%. It might not be true 100%, not 2030, maybe 2050, maybe 2060, not even 5%, maybe 10%, but it's also shows the study is based on analytics, and they were from a very good university in US. I don't remember the name actually. I'll just add in the video and the description so people can check out. And this is really interesting that the design part needs so many experience that is not written in the books, that is not written in the hard drive, it's not even taught in the school. You gain it with experience. To your point.
No, I completely agree. That's why I would say, you can never say never, right? But I see it would be a lot harder to substitute an architect with a machine. As an example, and what is AI good for? I think right now, for instance, in law, all the legal cases, that's how law operates, especially in a country like US. You have precedent of all the legal cases and the rulings and all of that establishes the database for a lawyer. So a big part of a lawyer's job is to go and access that information, process it, find similar cases, and to then see, okay, this is how we should go about it. So that's something that the AI will be able to do within seconds, right? So the idea of processing large amount of data and being able to find patterns and kind of tie it together. Exactly. Same with a big part of, say, a medical doctor. That's why WebMD became a thing, right? Because a lot of it is dealing with data, looking at symptoms, looking at cases, looking at database of medicine and treatments and finding correlations and looking at symptoms and being able to do it. Now, I think those are the type of things. I'm not saying it's an AI would replace a lawyer or a doctor, because you still have to physically examine and see and notice and talk and observe, get certain information that and make certain judgments that is not always available through data, through quantitative measures, right? So there's qualitative factors too. Same with the lawyer, right? But I would see bigger chunks of their work to be benefiting from AI, and then say architects. Architects, again, I would say all the research part, all the testing, all the sketching, visualizations would be greatly benefiting from that. But the things we do is just too complicated, at least now, as the way it is now. And even the way we work, if you go to every architect's office, they work differently. So it's the method, the design methodology, delivery is also so different from office to office, from architect to architect.
Exactly. There's not just one recipe of designing process. Each office has different set of rules, different set of approach, different set of tools, and it makes it very hard and tough to predict and collect in one set of role that you can say, okay, architects work with this, like this.
No, that's exactly what the machine does. It has an amazing ability to predict.
Yeah.
If you go to a doctor, the method they use, you go to any doctor, it's usually within the same country, they follow the same method, right? They extract data, they examine the patient, they write it down on files, and then they process it and offer treatment, right? So the method is the same. It's not, there are some who do more traditional, but typically most professionals within that field follow the same method. I mean, architects, I would say it's hard to find two that follow the same method, right? So, and that's something that becomes very hard for the machine to learn and to predict.
Yeah, that's true. Like in design process, a lot human intuition is so much involved, rather than just following some prescript method.
And that's what makes architecture great. That's why we also love architecture, because we look at different people who every day rethink and reinvent not just objects and buildings and spaces, but they reinvent the practice of architecture, the way we work, the tools we use, or how we misuse certain things and reappropriate it. So, and to me, that the whole thing, it's not like the product, the building as a product, but the process of producing it is part of quote unquote architecture. And that's something that I'm hoping AI would help us make it more interesting, more different, more innovative, rather than standardizing it and saying, no, from now on we'll just design the way this architect designs.
No, that's completely true. And one thing that you mentioned, and I totally agree with that, is as we move forward, we are reinventing our profession. Nobody, if you ask what is architecture, ask 100 of them, they will all answer something different. What is architecture? What is architecture? Someone says form follows function, someone says this, someone says that. So it's very, very, there are variety of directions that architects are looking, and it makes it, they don't have any solid answer what is architecture. And to that point, what do you think is a good architecture? What is architecture is a bit hard. I'm not going into that.
No, I think
what is a good one?
I think every When you start as a student, you learn these different definitions of architecture from your teachers, professors. You begin working in different offices. You see, again, different definition, and with that, a different approach to producing architecture from different employers and people you work with. Um, and I think for everyone, I hope their definition of architecture evolves, grows, and evolves with them. Um, I think for me, a good architecture, I see architecture not just as the art of building or the idea of creating spaces or objects or forms. For me, architecture is a framework that organizes the patterns of relations between objects, bodies, and particles in space. I mean, that's what in computer science they have architecture too, and that's essentially what architecture is. It's obviously not just building. It's not just the practice or the culture and the knowledge and the expertise around it. It includes all of it, but ultimately it's the thing by which those relationships between humans, non-humans,
Yes.
environment is organized and defined. And that's really why, for me, I'm more excited about simulations and how AI can use maybe that knowledge and that level of intelligence. And I'm more interested about rather than making intelligently designed spaces, um, I'm actually more interested in making the space itself and the elements in the space give them intelligence, right? So that our chairs and walls and doors have intelligence and they can interact with us, communicate with us. To me, that's more exciting. That's where I see the future of architecture, rather than just using all that computer and brain power to generate more intelligent, static, fixed structures. That's it's exciting, but less exciting. I think we're moving towards a time where we expect things to talk to us, to interact with us. Exactly. I mean, at the moment I now say Siri, multiple objects in the room will now listen and respond, right? So we need that interaction. We need buildings to be more adaptive, respond to their environment. We need buildings to be more resilient. We're going through climate change. We're going through a lot of things, changes. And I think it requires us to kind of, rather than just putting the work and using computation and artificial intelligence to improve the design process and end up with a similar product, now invest in making that product more and more intelligent and integrate the technology more into the mundane little things around us, the doors, the windows, the office chairs. Exactly. And that's what I'm more excited about.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, nice. I love it. So I think we can continue talking for hours, and I know you have lecture after this, but moving forward with my last two questions, what do you think about our platform?
I'm very excited about your platform. I think I mentioned it to you last time we just spoke yesterday, because I think it's dealing with, you know, um, in the past. I mean, I don't want to do a long history, but knowledge and information was always a kind of in a privileged space, in a sacred, private, privileged space. And throughout history, we've gone through all these time periods where, knowledge, information, news, all of these things became more and more public. And we realized that they're public rights, right? So universities and education becoming the model as a form of a public institution obviously embodies that, right? But now I think we're living in a world that we're much more connected. We also have tools that can connect us across multiple boundaries, borders, time zones. We have opportunities we didn't have before. And these opportunities are not just opportunities about sort of the type of things cultural institutions do, like events and lectures and exhibitions and all of that, but also things that deal with education itself. So the reason I'm excited about what what you've started and are growing is that it's dealing with that. It's using our technology today, and the social media, internet, webinars and Zooms and all of this, to not only just to connect us more, but to actually share that knowledge and information, which was previously only available in very specific places. You had to go, even as students, just not so long ago, like we would hear about a lecture, and if we were lucky, and sometimes we would take a train. I remember a few times I took a train from New York to New Haven because there was a lecture or event at Yale and I wanted to see it, And if I was living in California, I wouldn't be able to go because then I couldn't afford to fly, or I didn't have the time to fly, right? So you were very limited to the things that happened around you, or you had to, if you wanted to learn from certain people, you had to get into that school because they were teaching there, and you had to pay ton of money, tuition, you had to, right? So you had to pick and choose based on the options you had. And I think it's a different model to think about, providing that information and that knowledge and expertise in an online platform where everybody can access anywhere. And in some ways, to me, it decentralizes the educational models we have today. But also, I think the other aspect to that is the type of learning that happens. I think what you guys are doing with the workshops is important because there's a big gap in the academia, about teaching new tools, teaching ways of using it, new techniques, bringing expertise from different people who are using them, and providing especially a way for both students and practitioners to apply that knowledge in the design, fabrication, and the building industry. I think that's something that inevitably educational institutions will not be as flexible, responsive, just because the pace of things, how it moves. And there's always going to be a gap unless there are places where people can learn from others and share that information and exchange knowledge. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Obviously, in the past couple of years, we've been trying to close that gap, as you mentioned, with the number of workshops and online webinars that we've been doing. And we've been getting so many good feedbacks on doing these workshops. And it's not just students in the universities, it's also people from practice who've been doing this work for 30 years, 20 years. They're joining the workshops to upgrade their knowledge and catch up with the new tools and technologies that are emerging with our profession, which gives them a huge opportunity to move forward with their career. And thank you so much on that. One final question that I'm interested to ask: what is your advice for aspiring architects?
Difficult question. I think we could talk for 2 hours just about that. I think my advice is, and this is, I think, what I tell my students, as architects, we design and tell people how to live in the world, right? Essentially, we script that, right? That this is how, This is where you sleep. This is where you cook. This is where you eat. This is where you work. This is how to use stuff, right? Um, and in order to think what's the best way of interacting and living and experiencing the world, you can only do it well if you have experienced enough. So my best advice is for architects to travel a lot, do different things, have crazy experiences, be able to actually kind of see what one can do in space, in the world, and to enrich your experience, so that when you actually go and want to propose or design new spaces, you have a lot of the experiences that you have had that you could build from, and to hopefully come up with new types of experiences, a new type of relationships between peoples and people and their environments, between people and buildings. So a lot of the times, if we just limit ourselves to what architecture has been, what buildings and built environment has been, that's very limiting. And I think we should always look outside of architecture for inspirations, to learn from how other things work, other spaces function, and to also use our own personal experiences and how we learn, how we interact in the world, to bring it to the table. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Iman. This was really a brilliant conversation and I enjoyed it a lot. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming to our show.
Thank you, Hamid. It was a pleasure. Enjoyed it. Yeah.